welcome to everyone. Very excited to have you here. We are going to just do a very quick round of introductions. So I am Hillary Black. I am a conversation designer, content creator. I am the creator of conversationdesignerjobs.com and the host of Conversation Designers Internet Club, and I'm very excited to welcome everyone today. So let us start off our introductions. Saurav, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Saurav. So I'm based out of India. Currently, I'm working with Publicis as a senior experience designer, and I started my career as a conversation designer back in 2018. And since then, I've been quite lucky enough to meet all of you fantastic folks out in this industry. And yeah, I'm really excited to have a conversation with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Micah, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi there. I'm Maaike Groenewegen. I'm also a conversation designer, and I guess I can call myself a prompt designer or prompt engineer nowadays. I currently work as a conversational AI consultant with Etsy, and that's a wonderful, wonderful team I'm working with. And I also teach other people how to work with Gen AI in a way that makes sense. And hi to all the familiar names in the chat. It's great to see so many familiar people.
Absolutely. Sophia, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, I'm Sophia. I am a conversational AI product designer. I have a background in linguistics and programming, and I've experience in chatbot, voicebot, designing, developing, and now implementing all these AI-driven solutions. I'm also very proud of being a Women in Voice Mexico ambassador. So I actively promote this inclusion of women at this intersection of language, design, and technology. And I'm super happy to be here.
Very happy to have you here. Last but not least, Olivia, could you introduce yourself?
Hello, my name is Olivia Marisi. Super excited to be here. Thank you for having me. I am a conversational architect with 66 Degrees, a Google Premier partner, and I've been in the machine learning, conversational AI, linguistics space for better part of the last decade. I received my PhD in linguistics from the University of Colorado, also a member of Women in Voice, so love that shout out and excited for this fun conversation today.
Yeah, super excited for this conversation. And yeah, just want to point out here that we are definitely a global panel. So I'm very excited to be welcoming everyone who is in a very different time zone. And also, you know, we share such a common experience in conversation design, but I do find that everyone does things so differently. So I'm super excited to just sort of hear what everyone has been up to. Obviously, we know as conversation designers that this has been sort of a hot topic of, are we still relevant? You know, how is everything going to change? Are we still going to be important? And I personally think that conversation designers are more important than ever now with the advancements with LLMs and prompt engineering and all of that. So I just think that this is such an important topic, and I'm so grateful to have such a wonderful panel here with us. So I put up a poll here just to ask if everyone has been using LLMs in their day-to-day as a conversation designer. So far, I see that most people are, which is great. I think the changes that I have seen over the past like 8 or so years of being in this industry, this is definitely the biggest one, I think. So just it's very interesting to see that people are active in using it. So I'll give people just a couple more minutes to answer our poll and then share the results with all of you. But let's just dive in to the questions. So we have here a few questions that we're just going to ask to our group, all about, you know, how our roles have changed and all of that. So let's just get started, get into it. I want to know, have LLMs changed your day-to-day as a conversation designer? How much? I think everyone, we can just like kind of go around for this, but let's start with Sophia. How do you find that your day-to-day has changed?
Yes, I think has changed a lot because now we are thinking about chatbots or voice bots in a differently in a new paradigm, right? So I would like to mention some of them that I think are relevant or that I think that has changed a lot. I would start with the learning curve and the client alignment. I think that is the integration of this new technology that now is more established requires like a steep learning curve and also demand like a more nuanced approach to engaging with customers and setting realistic expectations about what an LLM can achieve and how these tools can align with their business goals. I think that always when starting the initial talks with the customer, I always face this. Like, let's put on the table everything and let's set correctly the expectations. In terms of designing, I would say the conversation design approach, it's quite different because we shift from a static to from a rule-based mindset to a something more dynamic. And this allow us more flexibility, but we also have to think about different scenarios, right? So we have to design thinking on these possible pathways, right? As well as this very beautiful part of the content creation and the tone alignment. I think it's quite different because this stage of crafting the content has evolved. And instead of like pre-writing the fixed responses, now we have to focus on designing like the prompts that can effectively guide the LLM to generate these responses that can align with the brand's tone and voice. And I think this is a iteration process. The other two, or yeah, the other two stages that I found very different when designing with LLMs, I would say error handling, because now it's more complex because it's unlike the traditional rule-based systems where the errors are more predictable in some way. Now we have an open world, right? We can have an out of scope inputs or unexpected questions. So we have in this system prompt or with different strategies, we have to find the ways to handle this or how to take the user back to the flow somehow.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, I would say the testing and the evaluation. This was challenging at the beginning because these experiences are super different with a different criteria. We are moving from this intent, entity, training phrases stage or phase to a more open stuff. And now we have to think about context, coherence, adaptability, all this stuff that we have to create different frameworks to evaluate it, to evaluate this, how the LLM works and if it's working correctly. So I would say it's very different from different perspectives. Yes.
Yeah, it is. It's absolutely very different. And I feel like all of the changes that you have mentioned make it sound a lot more challenging as well. Like, do you find that it is more challenging in the day-to-day than previously?
Yes.
Yeah. 100%. Anyone else? Let's just go around. Micah, do you want to share? Obviously, I think especially having your own business, like a lot of things have changed in the past year or so.
Yes, well, I must say that the biggest thing that changed was the kind of clients that I got over the last year and a half, because typically I work for larger organizations with a customer support bot. And while I do work on these use cases still, and yes, we do have some kind of Gen AI incorporated, most of my Gen AI work is now with publishers and smaller companies that are looking to automate some of their workflows. So rather than designing conversational flows, I'm basically back to another area where I worked in, namely robotic process automation, where I sit down with the client and kind of try to discover what problem are you trying to solve here? What is it that you do now? How can we chunk that into little steps? And which of these steps can I automate, either with Gen AI or with other technology? So it's interesting that I'm not just a conversation designer anymore, because yes, language is still the interface, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a conversation anymore. So I'm having a way broader scope now, and I really enjoyed that. And Sophia, I relate to basically everything you say, so I'm not going to repeat that. Big yes from me as well. I definitely relate there.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I do feel, especially with the robotic process automations, is something that we were doing like years ago of trying to help people, but now it's like you can actually succeed in that, which is very interesting, and it makes complete sense that publishers would be more in tune with that, as especially generating content and all of those types of things. It's a new world, right?
Yes, exactly. If there's one tiny little addition that I can put out there, is prompting for non-English is a challenge. Because LLMs are trained on English data and they're not very good at translation. So getting the right tone of voice for instance, Dutch, that takes a lot of effort. Yes.
Oh, wow. Yes. That is very interesting. Surav, what about for you as well? Like, are you noticing the same challenges between with the translation, and then also, how has your day-to-day changed?
Right. So I'll just keep it short. What I have noticed is businesses having a different expectation. So back, like maybe 4 or 5 years back, it was like, okay, this is the business, or this is the requirement, and you have this list of entity intents, and these are the synonyms what we are expecting how the bot to behave, and then we used to work on that. But right now, with LLM in picture, with Chat GPT in picture, it's all over the place. What they're expecting, they sometimes I feel like they even don't know, right? So they'll see something in the market, something that is trending, some new technology, and they would want that to be implemented into their business. And we as a designers, it's our job to educate them. I think that's where our first step should be, right? Educating them what works, what doesn't work, what is it, what is future, what is aspirational. I think that has changed for me.
Yeah, that it's interesting. That was one of the things that I was thinking about the most, of how my job has changed. And it almost feels like it is back to the beginning, where people didn't really understand chatbots, and they were being mostly created by developers and not conversation designers. And so it was a lot of education back then. And that was without any of the advanced functionality. And it was sort of the hype of people saying, what about these chatbot things? Like we need one of these. And now it's like, what about these, AI? What about these LLMs? What about ChatGPT? Like, can we have that? So really the setting the realistic expectations. And I'm sure in like an agency setting, it's even more important, because, those bigger companies want to be first and they want to be the best. So they definitely have that. I'm sure they're coming with a lot of challenges for you, if I had to guess.
Right.
Yeah. Olivia, how about you?
I think first of all, does my audio sound okay?
Yeah, it does.
Is it okay? I heard it was a little echoey, so just want to be sure. I mean, seconding what everyone said, I think, and we'll talk about how things haven't changed, which I think is an interesting perspective, but the point about education, more true than ever, because there's a lot of media hype, some of it accurate, a lot of it not super accurate. There's a lot of folks who, the threshold and the bar has sort of been lowered to play around with some of these technologies. So we can end up in situations where someone says, oh, well, I tested this out on ChatGPT, or I want my bot to do that. And you say, awesome, that's exciting and that's innovative. And let's make sure that this is safe for production. And let's make sure that we can handle data appropriately. So I think it has heightened a lot of the same principles and added a new layer of complexity for things like enterprise security, and making sure that things are genuinely production ready has actually raised the bar in a lot of ways to do things in a safe and responsible way. And it's introduced an entire new layer of this arm of responsible AI that I think is part of our charge when we are building these experiences. And that's something that is not always talked about on the early stages of projects when it's like, wow, this is magical. It's not magic, it's real humans behind it, and that's great. And so you want to hire smart humans behind it as well.
Yeah, that's for sure. And even with like the existing content too, it's not even just about all of the things that you're bringing in, it's about all of the things that you already have. And I think we're recognizing how many holes are within our own existing content as these companies who are wanting to use that as a part of their experience as well, or your sources that you are kind of pulling from. Are those things that are reputable? Are those things that are truthful? And then how can you make sure that you are using just those, So I actually want to jump ahead, Olivia, to what you're saying, because I think this kind of pairs well with this previous question of like, let's talk about what had changed, but now let's talk about what has not changed. So what would you say, I guess, in terms of the traditional conversation design principles, the processes that we have gone through on a daily basis? Like, are there things that you find are just as important, or if not more important? Obviously, like mentioning the content being more important. It always was important, but it's even kind of more important at this point. What are some of the things that you have noticed that have remained the same?
I mean, fundamentally, and I always come back to this, is the use case. Did we define the use case? Do we understand the user? Have we identified the problem? Do we know what we are solutioning for? And that sounds, straightforward, but as we all know, that can be a challenging question to answer, because the bar has been lowered in a lot of ways. That sure, one can take a website, scrape it, spin up a bot on that scraped data. Is that a solution to something? Is that a problem or something? What actually was the problem? Because a lot of times we, just because one can doesn't mean one should. And identifying that use case, I think, is even more paramount to make sure that you are providing a solution that is useful. Did someone just mention something about the audio? Is that me or on their end?
Oh, I don't think so. Oh, maybe it's on their end, because you sound fine for us. I just was noticing how many people were agreeing with you saying just because you can doesn't mean you should, which for sure has the same sentiment to like early days of chatbots of just because you can doesn't mean you should replicate all of your website content and put it into a chatbot and call it customer support. I think that we definitely have, as much as people are saying, oh, it's a new world, the conversations are the same, that's for sure, when it comes to realistic expectations and goal setting and all of that. Anyone else care to share their sort of principles that they still stand by?
To just chime in with what Olivia and you are talking about, also with this focus on RAG as like the next holy grail in Gen AI. I somehow feel like we need to take that step back again and say, hey, answering a question is not always the same as solving a problem. So let's move out of that stage and let's actually make sure that people can do something to solve their problem. So yes, that hasn't changed either, I feel. And also just being the sensible person in the room, like, hey, why are we doing this in the first place? And is this the best way to do that? Also being a user advocate. I mean, we're still the ones seeing all these conversations. And to me, it's always so sobering to realize that every row in my spreadsheet is a real person with a real problem. And that's why I love kind of, still going through all these convos rather than having of course, metrics are important too. But that's something that's going to change. How are you going to measure, did this answer your question, when your answer might be generated every time? Like, what is like the bandwidth of a correct question versus an incorrect question? So I think that our critical thinking skills are still very necessary. Our user advocacy is still very necessary. Our language knowledge is going to be more necessary than ever, because all of a sudden everything is about language. So yeah, I think we can definitely rest assured and go to sleep and know that our jobs are not going to. And the one thing, and then I'll kind of fade into the background again. In order to know whether your RAG is generating correct answers, someone needs to read these documents that we're feeding into our LLM vector space, right? Someone needs to know what is the ground truth. And if we're just generating text and we're not reading it, who is going to read it?
Right. Like we can't just have computers read it and tell us that it's good. It's kind of like a circular issue at that point.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yes. I would like to say, like I always say to the customer, like they say, like using a sledgehammer to crack a nut, right?
Oh, yeah.
Again, going back to the use cases, as Olivia mentioned, I think now we have like this request to push for implementing an LLM, and it's probably not needed, right? It's more like a marketing strategy. And again, we have to go back and check the use cases. And I have faced some requirements where the customer wants to use this generative power to answer quite simple questions, and they don't think about the cognitive load for the customer. It's like a user don't want to read 3 paragraphs of information, even though it's the best information. We have to go back to the principles. You have to be concise. If the LLM is, an LLM is a super powerful tool, but is it the tool for this use case? And I think that everything goes back to the very beginning, the use case. So yes, I completely agree. We are using a super powerful tool. In some cases, it's not that needed. We are good with intent-based solutions. Yes, we have to put it in a balance, right? Which is in this case, which one is in another case. And I always like to talk about money. Like you are spending a lot of money on generating an answer that always is the same. So you don't need it. And sometimes when we approach to the customer with the money recipe or it's like, oh yeah, you're right. So it's something that we have to put on the table too.
Yeah, that is such a good point. And it actually does go into our other question about kind of like the shift in what people are asking for. And what you have found is customers are asking for something, and the challenge being something that they don't even necessarily need. And would you say that that's kind of what you have noticed, is just that they are wanting this, in theory, more free-flowing conversation, but not necessarily taking into account what their goal was in the first place and what that actually means for their budget, their business, their reputation, etc.
Yeah. Besides that, I have found two cases where an LLM is a good solution, and I have found that the most of the time, other than using an LLM for marketing purposes, is seeking improvements, like in areas where these rule-based systems have fallen short. For example, error handling. And I think that this is the most common approach. Like we have this system that is working properly, but we have tons of errors. How can we handle these errors? And if you review, most of them can be handled by an LLM in a proper way. So handling error and also lead generation. For me, these are the 2 cases that are the most request for customers in a good use for an LLM, or that an LLM, once you review the previous tool, can be used in a very successful way.
Yeah, I work primarily in lead generation, and I do find that it's something that can be used more specifically in error handling and like domain specific, industry specific information. But to Micah's point in the chat, keeping a button, keeping an option, especially because I work with SMS, and so that's something that you want to be short. Buttons are still relevant, and not everything needs to be entirely open-ended. Not everything needs to be confusing up to the user to how do I even respond to this when a simple click of a button or responding ABC is totally fine. Like, I think sometimes we almost forget that the user just wants it to be easy. They don't care about how much they can type or what they can ask. It's not necessarily just about like flexing your muscles and saying, oh, we have this, amazing AI assistant. It's just like, does it work? Can I use it? Can I get the purpose that I want to get out of it? Like, that's it.
Yeah.
So one thing, when we're talking about what our clients or customers are asking for and what we're hearing, I also say, let's not be limited by assuming that generative AI should only or can only be used to answer FAQ questions and spit up answers. That is a usage, and it's one that has become fairly obvious to folks, but I've seen a couple of questions in the chat about hybrid systems and other opportunities, and that's where I'm seeing a lot of technological innovation and ways that we can really save time, save money, do really transformative things, particularly with existing chatbots. Things like, our intents and entities, and a lot of times businesses have spent quite a bit of time and effort in over the last few years, last decade or so, investing in very large infrastructures for their intents and entities. So let's see, can we use an LLM to classify the intent and maintain the rest of the architecture? Can we do things with no matches? Can we identify gaps? Can we come up with new training phrases? The FAQ answers is a use case, but it is only one. I think it can help approach the conversation, say that's one option, but let's be strategic about what we can do in these hybrid modalities and hybrid ways of thinking about the data. And again, it comes down to the use case, the action, generative as one tool in our toolbox. But I like, Sophia, your image of the sledgehammer and the nut, that if you only have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So let's think about the other tools in the repertoire. And that's such a big discussion point, I think, on what hybrid means and what that looks like. But there's so many opportunities to use LLMs for working with existing intents and entities and making them even more powerful than they have been.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other challenges to share? Client challenges, I guess.
Yeah, I have a small thought here. So, what has not changed specifically? What I feel is about keeping humans in the loop, right? So back then, when we used to work with intensive entities, uh, we the human agent, let's say if you're working for a call center, right? So agents would leverage this chatbot for their help, right? But now when we have LLMs and chat GPTs and it's creating everything autonomous, right? So how do we keep humans in the loop? I think this has become more relevant now, and we as designers, I think it's our job to think about it more than anyone else.
Mm.
Yeah.
100%.
Absolutely. And kind of elaborating on that, not having humans anymore, like not necessarily to have human written flows in your bot, means that if you want to generate content that is meant as user support, that means that the input for that needs to be absolutely unambiguous, absolutely flawless. And I find that data collection and data ingestion is actually the biggest culprit for most Gen AI projects, and the biggest hurdle for getting them from prototype to production. Because, of course, as a conversation designer, we're the ones asking the question, hey, you've got 6 procedures for this user question. Which one is the right one? And typically the answer you get is, well, it depends. If it's Monday and you're wearing a blue sweater, then it's this one. But if it's Tuesday night and you're feeling like having broccoli for dinner, then you need to take the other one. So we start talking to the subject matter experts and we kind of reconcile and get like one answer. That's the truthful answer. If you ask a RAG solution to do that, it cannot do that for you. So what it will do is will take parts of these different documents and combine them into something new. So even if these facts are correct on their own, the combination might be completely wrong. So having data that's unambiguous and correct, you'll be surprised at how much of a challenge that is for most companies, let alone the format that it lives in, because it can be a network drive and it's like documents with names like version 1.0, this is the correct one, oh, but not really revision 612. So I think that content curation and making sure you've got a proper data set that can be trusted and that's maintained as well is going to be very important.
Yeah, and likely maintained by, right?
Sorry, can you repeat?
And likely maintained by a human. I mean, a human still needs to have eyes on that. Like you can't just continue to pull in your data and push it back in, you know?
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
The point about the knowledge bases is so key. I noticed an uptick in, especially in like the beginning stages of projects, if a client or customer is saying, okay, well, hey, here's our knowledge base. How good is a bot likely to do? That's the question I'm getting a lot, and that's a hard question to answer. So there's other kinds of evaluation techniques you can do on the knowledge base itself and testing it out and seeing what's in there and you know, spinning up some quick ways to test the knowledge. But that's a really big opportunity, I think, for companies to assess, again, what's that knowledge look like and how is it organized? And okay, great, it's in PDFs, but are there hyperlinks in the PDF? And then there's bullet points, and then there's lists, and there's this, that, and the other thing. And that's, yes, I think my gut thing, because these things cause challenges for sure in how we want to parse the documents and chunk them and embed them for, you know, our specific purposes. I think that the management of the knowledge base systems is going to be increasingly important, and that's a really strong skill set that we can bring to the table when we're working with these customers.
What fundamental cognitive and linguistic guidelines do you think should reevaluate in the age of ultra flexible LLM powered conversations? We have quite a few linguistic background people here, so I would love to know what you all think just in terms of which linguistic fundamentals I think are still relevant and which are not, right?
Well, if I can barge in with good old Paul Grice and the four maxims of the cooperative principle, I never used them a lot when I was still designing my own conversations. But now that I'm talking to LLMs, I'm like, gosh, they don't know anything about Grice because they hallucinate like crazy. They're really, really wordy. They never stay on topic. So they're basically kind of flaunting every maxim like every other turn. So all of a sudden I'm like, well, it might actually not be too bad to keep Grice in the back of your mind when you're designing with GenAI.
Completely agree. Yes, I had the same experience. Like I've never think about it until creating or designing for an LLM powered chatbot. Yes, it's like, what are you talking about? What do you mean? We are having a conversation, but you are not having a conversation with this LLM. Yes. Yeah, definitely. I would agree. Yes.
That's funny. We have so many questions. There's two more questions that I want to get to before we jump into audience questions. And one kind of what is related to that is kind of just about like tools, frameworks, platforms that you are currently using. This is even something that I find a challenge in my own day-to-day is like when someone is asking you to generate prompts, where are you putting them? Like, what are you doing with them? Where are they being created, stored? What is sort of your process for that? If anyone cares to share what they are using. And this could also be for design as well, but I feel like we all kind of know the similar prototyping tools, et cetera, but specifically for any like LLM or GenAI related work.
Yeah. Are we allowed to mention names?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, because I've been looking for a prompt management system and a prompt playground for a long time. We've got PromptNit, which is a very basic one, and it's a great one to start with. I'll put the names in the chat later on. I've got Prompt Hub, which is also kind of supporting teams. But I currently work most with, there are actually a few startup friends of mine in Amsterdam. It's called Orc.ai from Orchestra. And they have developed an LLM ops platform that has a pretty great prompt management library with version control and everything, snippets, what have you. And that's typically where I start looking nowadays. I'm looking way more in the developer space. I've got my spreadsheets in GitHub just to do version management. But what the challenge is, if you have a lot of prompts in one solution and you want to maintain them and you want to keep an overview of what runs where, you almost can't escape from having that kind of more software, like code-based solution, where you can call the prompt from a central repository and put it in your solution. But it's interesting that prompt management has been kind of, not a very sexy topic apparently. But all of a sudden, there are a few companies out there that are kind of jumping into that gap.
That's great. Yeah, definitely we'll add those links to this doc to share with everyone afterwards, because I know this is something that people are going to want to look at. And yeah, anyone else, if there's any tools that you're currently using or searching for, I guess, too, if we want to put it out there into the world.
I think my trilogy is Miro, a good spreadsheet, and Mike made a very good statement about control versioning. So I think when people is like, what kind of skills do I have to have as a conversational designer for this new LLM stuff? It always, at the end, ends on a programming skill, whatever it is. So yeah, I completely agree. And finally, I use a lot of either OpenAI, Gemini, ChatGPT, Gemini, or Claude sandbox. So you don't have to build your own environment. You can test there and do a spreadsheet or somehow a way of track the results. Yeah.
Awesome. Any others?
Well, we have to give a little shout out to VoiceFlow, right?
Yes, of course.
That's true.
The VoiceFlow has been amazing. I mean, they started out as my sketchbook for conversation design, and right now they are implementing a prompt library as well. So they really, I mean, they grow with you. It's really cool, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think especially for like an all-in-one option and giving people the ability, like I'll use it to just quickly prototype even one flow, just to be able to demonstrate what I want it to do. I still use Excel spreadsheets as well. And being that I work with a startup, it's kind of easier to just have things be quick, but certainly it's not really like version control at all. So that's like one downside, I think. We also have two more suggestions in the chat: prompt flow, which does have version control, and prompt layer, neither of which I have tried. So we can add all of these to just general recommendations for people too. So last question before we get into our audience questions is about skills. So would love to know your recommendations for what skills conversation designers new or experienced should learn currently, in order to succeed in the future of conversation design as we know it, LLMs world, and where can they go to learn this? So if you have any sort of suggestions for your top skills, and that could even be skills that were already relevant for conversation design, and then also where to go and get that. Anyone want to jump in?
We've been talking about version control, being familiar with these, if you haven't jumped into the prompt engineering side of things, understanding concepts like version control and getting familiar with GitHub and other repositories, and just understanding the architecture of how that process works, especially if you have been more on the, wireframing side of things, I think is a good, all these tools we've thrown out here is just good to start thinking in that mindset of what version control and what these testing flows look like and how to do A/B tests for things and that sort of headspace.
Yeah, I don't want to push people into programming, but I think it's a super skill that it's very needed because you are, I mean, the bots have thousands of data of interactions. So learning how to use a spreadsheet, Excel, Python for this data processing is super useful. So yeah, I think it is a super plus knowing these even basic code skills. I mean, you won't build entire platform. It's for data processing, and I think that's super helpful because you are managing a lot of data, and it is way easier for visualizing or for have data insights that now it's quite relevant. Yeah.
I
Yeah,
think
I think you asked where can they go, right? They can come here.
Oh yeah, where can you go? Like where to learn these skills, or if there's any courses, websites that you recommend, what would you say?
I think the internet is trending with so many different topics, articles, videos, tutorials. I think the best way to learn is to come together into a forum like this and just talk. Because one thing that I've noticed is when we started our career, it all started with conversation designer in XYZ company, right? But it all evolved into something. We are not just conversation designers. We have evolved into so many different skills. I think creating that network, talking to people, if you are new in this area, or even if you're experienced, I mean, it gives us so much exposure to learn, right? So how each one of us have grown into this field, and also like in terms of tools, each tool is getting tested in so many different ways. So even with Google last year, they experimented with search generative experience, right? So it's like, how can we have a contextually aware web flow for someone who's scrolling a Chrome page, right? So everywhere, like every day, in our own office, like we have to go through so many different tutorials and learnings every month, right? So it's very difficult to cope up with so many things going on in the market. I think the best way is to just come together and talk.
Yeah, show up. And there are so many events happening every single day, I think, around these topics, and so many blog posts and things that are coming out. So yeah, it's definitely, I know I have learned a lot from all of you, even in this short amount of time. So I think all that you can do to kind of make sure that you're both contributing to the conversations and participating in them, just to kind of see what others are doing and up to. And Micah, I know you're saved for last because I know that you do have a very great place that people can learn some of these skills.
Yeah, I've got this course and we do come together there and we talk a lot, but most of all, we have a lot of hands-on learning. When I look at skills, by the way, the link is in the chat. I'll also put it in the doc. There's a new cohort open for January. And it's basically Gen AI design for people like us. It's a course that I developed because I wanted to learn about it. And I thought, well, if I'm learning about it, why not share it with all of you? But I mean, you can start on your own. And the thing is that, like you will say, there's so much to learn that sometimes it's a little bit hard to kind of determine where to get started. But in terms of skills, I would say that knowing how to write a good and unambiguous instruction, and that's an art. I mean, I don't know if you know this video about the dad who, the children have to write an instruction for making a peanut butter sandwich, and the dad follows them literally. It's hard writing a good instruction. And it's what I did as a technical writer for 25 years. But knowing how to prompt properly and structured and in such a way that it's reusable, knowing how to split it up like a big unstructured prompt into smaller steps and kind of link them together so that they become this little chain. But also knowing how to go from use case to user task analysis and mapping out this workflow, it's all very close to what we do already. So I would definitely advise to start with what you already know and code. Yes, perhaps I do code as well, but also practice. Just get voice flow out, and rather than building chatbots, start building workflows, start building content generators, and see what an LLM does. Try to compare different LLMs. And also don't forget to stay human. So I make it good practice to not only, prompt, but I also literally write, and I'm creative with my little books and my pens, because after a day of prompting, sometimes you just go crazy. So I don't know if that's something you guys relate to. Like after a day of throwing spaghetti at the wall, I'm like, oh, I'm going to write. I'm going to do something nice.
Yeah, especially when you work on something for so long and then in the end, the results are worse than they started out. That's where I'm kind of just like, I need to step away and do something completely outside of this, because I can't ask the same thing in a different way any other way. Like it's still not working out for me. So sometimes you just need to take a break, get out in nature or something like that, just to kind of reset everything and start from scratch.
Yeah.
I would also I know we've talked about linguistics and some principles from linguistics a few times. Relatedly, it's coming from my academic background a bit, but conversation analysis is a really nice framework for thinking about the actions that someone is taking. So in addition to the use case, again, what action? As we've been talking about hybrid systems and how to make choices about when to use Gen AI and LLMs, if we know that the action that needs to happen is a greeting, then we can make decisions, design decisions from there, and then architectural and then actual build decisions on what that greeting looks like. If we know the action is a request for confirmation, if the action is the actual confirmation in the end, there's a million different actions, but getting that, I'm seeing nods, which I appreciate, that framework for what an action is and what are the actions that folks take in interaction, agnostic to the language, to the modality, I think is a helpful way of framing the concept of what we're doing here, especially in a way Mike already brought up, to make things repeatable and reusable is such a key way of thinking about this. I'm going to drop in, it's a little bit academic, it's a sort of classic textbook, but this is my go-to recommendation if you want to start thinking about what does an action mean in interaction. I'll drop in the chat here.
Thank you. Yeah, there's a lot of good resources being dropped in the chat that I'll make sure to send out to everyone as well. And I think that also from a lot of what the questions are coming up when I'm looking at the audience questions is kind of people wanting to know, oh, I have this background. How can I, pivot into conversation design? Oh, I have linguistics, I have engineering. I'm trying to get in. I'm an early career designer. There are so many different ways to learn and so many different paths and so many different skill sets that are relevant to conversation design, as we all know. So I think that kind of leaning on what makes sense to you and then using these courses, using these books, using these meetups or anything like that to just fill in the gaps. How can you fill in the gaps with a course? Someone had shared a link to learn Python and AI. If that's something that is interesting to you, that you think you can pick up, I'm not the best at those types of things. So I've tried more to lean into the content side of things and just find teams that have those strengths that I don't have. So I think don't be discouraged by thinking I need to learn Python, become a linguistics pro, be a voice flow agent person or whatever. I think there still are places for everyone. And at the core of it, it is all about the user. It's all about the experience. It's all about the conversation. And those are things that can kind of ground you as you might be feeling overwhelmed in this new world that we're all in. Stan has a question. Let's see if this can work. Hello, Stan. I'm not sure. I think I have everyone muted, and so it might be why questions are not being asked. Stan, do you want to write your question into the chat and then we can answer it that way? I apologize. Let's see if he writes in. Someone did ask, I want to answer a quick audience question about voice flow and where to learn. They do have, and for anyone too, they have a very active Discord community. And that is a very good place to learn through tutorials and through kind of like other users that are very proficient at it. They do have a lot of YouTube videos as well, but since their product is just very, very quickly changing, and they definitely release new features like every other day, it seems. I would say that probably the Discord community is the fastest way to be the most up to date in terms of their newest features. Let's see if there's any audience questions here that we have not yet answered. So collaborating with teams, I would love to get a sense of, anyone, especially I think working on the agency side as well, working with engineering teams, and maybe just talking a bit about how you can work with technical teams and balancing what is being asked, what is possible, and what is best practice, I would say. I feel like there's are all kind of like an interesting balance that you need to strike as a designer, if anyone has anything to share about that.
Right, so maybe I can chime in on this. Right. So what is happening right now is as we are slowly moving into generative AI-based chatbots, right? So the whole design system is changing. So new components, new assets are needs to be developed, and so a lot of design work is going on in order to support this these new chatbots that will be implemented in the future, right? So the engineering folks, the issue that is happening right now is maybe they're not able to use the existing elements, right? So hence, I think this is where even I have faced the same thing, like that communication gap with them, because the design system, the components are not updated.
Mm-hmm.
So I think next year for bigger companies, it's a very big challenge, or even I think it's in the roadmap as to how can this be into the priority list.
Do you find it's a bigger challenge with the clients or with the engineering teams? Like I guess it's almost like who sort of wins out in that discussion?
I think there are challenges with clients as well as with engineering team as well. But I think internal challenges are kind of tricky to solve because the engineers would make assumptions, right? Okay, so whatever designs we create, whatever flows we create, it will automatically fit into their system, into their periphery. But that's not the case, because whenever we are using LLMs, what expectation we are setting is that it's not the chatbot is not just sitting in one corner, like we used to happen before, right? So what we're trying to do is we are automating the whole system, so that the person who is interacting with that chatbot, they can talk to the whole system, not just one corner of the screen. So that I think is a very big challenge, and the engineering team is facing that, according to me.
Yeah. I mean, they definitely have the challenges and they have to build it. And so I think that's like, quite a big challenge. I personally see a lot of prompts being written by engineers, which is also a thing that you sort of experienced in the early days of chatbots, all being made by developers and written by developers, which is another reason why I kind of said that I think conversation designers are more important than ever. But I think that, it's definitely kind of like this weird gray area for me personally. But obviously, there's a lot of collaboration that happens, especially within a small team. So it's a lot easier for me. But yeah, to answer Chris's question, the engineer prompts don't typically go very well. But sometimes I think they probably get into the final version without me knowing, because I'm not the person who is deploying it. So, it's kind of, yeah, this, as Grace said, the same mistakes happen again with that.
Yeah, I think it also depends on how you as a conversation design are involved in the programming stuff or in the coding stuff. I have seen that the most I am capable of running my own environment, running my own test, I have more control of my work as a conversational designer using specifically LLMs. Because I am able to do version controlling. I am able to do testing. I am able to see what's going on as the whole product, how functions are integrated, how API is integrated. So I think you are more aware of what is happening in the bot as a whole, because I think now the line, it's quite confusing. So in my experience, it's a lot of communication with the engineering team, like setting the tasks and also sharing like a lot of insights, because you can have insights from both sides, right? So yeah, it's a slight line.
I know we're at time, but we just touched. I feel like we'd have a whole panel just on insights with LLMs. But I'll say when we're working with diverse teams, again, being respectful of everyone's expertise and drawing on that expertise, I found it can be useful to ground yourself in something like a metric. And if you are struggling with, someone else's prompt that isn't working very well, or something that isn't going well, again, we want to be respectful and collaborative, so we can take it to say, okay, well, one of our metrics was, did this resolve the user's problem? And if it didn't, let's figure out why, and let's figure out how to revisit it. And giving yourself something to focus on, and giving an outcome that can be a little bit more objective and give the whole team something to focus on, can kind of take some of that tension out, and then ultimately, hopefully, provide a better user experience.
Yeah, and I think for us,
sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Just real quick, is that this also is a great incentive for us to work on our design rationale, because we know about language. So we should be able to tell that story to others and to take them along and to help them explore and discover the wonder of what language actually is, like the small miracles that happen in conversation. And I do find that, well, I was saying engineers don't like writing. They don't like documenting. But if you sit together and say, hey, let's write a story, and if you can make sure it's parameterized and codified so that it can end up in your code base, I can kind of help you explore the other stuff, the language stuff, because, hey, you do coding language, I do natural language. We're the same.
Yeah, that definitely makes a lot of sense. And I think speaking their language, and similar to what Olivia is saying, like speaking the language in something that is very concrete, like a metric, or like, something that either functions or doesn't function, is a great way to get on the same page when they might be seeing it as, you're saying this will be a better experience for the user, but what does that really mean? They don't necessarily care as much about that because it is not a measurable outcome. It's more of an opinion to them. So I think that, looking at how you can speak that same language is for sure key. Yes, we are over time. We have so many more questions that we're not going to be able to get to. I really apologize for that, but maybe we'll need to do a part 2. I can also collect these questions to hopefully answer over time. And I think this is definitely showing us all that we want to talk more about this, and that we should talk more about this in the future. So thank you to all of our panelists who have joined and shared their experience. You all shared such amazing insights. And I am so happy that you were so willing to be open with us about all of this.